perhaps if I could take the advantage of having the mic and starting, I wanted to ask you about your first two sources of genuine wealth. So to remind the audience, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, so the fourth and fifth sources are things like buildings and capital. You own buildings, or you have a lot of money in the bank. But the first two sources are personal well-being. For example, if you found a purpose in life and you're engaged and enthusiastic about every day, you get up early in the morning and looking forward to the things that you're going to do in the day. That's the first source of genuine wealth. Is that fair?
Yeah, the first form is human capital or human assets,
Okay.
which is, again, I will use the medicine wheel as my framework: physical, mental, physical, emotional well-being.
Yes.
The Inuit elders taught me, if even one aspect of that wheel is imbalanced, you have a wobbly wheel, right? So I said, what's suicide amongst teenagers in Inuit? It's a wobbly aspect of their spiritual well-being, the elder told me. So I think the medicine wheel is a useful beginning of, right, looking at human well-being. The determinative health model could be used. So there's different ways of looking at that first capital. The second one, of course, is social capital, relationships.
Right, and so the second one, so I want to ask about the first and second, and so our relationships. I mean, if we're going into our houses and not talking with our neighbors, then we don't have very high social capital. In Roseto, Pennsylvania, the low incidence of cardiac disease in the mid-20th century, genetics and diet were excluded, and it apparently was just because they had high social capital. People, the mayor would come in and talk to people at a restaurant, people talk to their neighbors, and so on. So my question about these two sources of genuine wealth, we all know what's in our bank account probably. We're following with some anxiety perhaps the amount of our debt, mortgage, the death pledge. If I hate mortgages, frankly. But we know how to measure these things. How many buildings do you own and so on. How do we measure the first and second source of genuine wealth in a way that it provides a feedback system so that we know this is a source of genuine wealth? We really need to build this. We need to build social capital. We need to build individual well-being. How do we measure it in a way so that, I'll open the question, I'm going to direct it to Mark, but open it to you. How do we measure it in a way so that we become conscious of it and we engage in it and we're really trying to build those first two sources of genuine wealth? Because to me personally, this is really a big deal. So I wanted to ask Mark
I'll
about
just give you one example of work I've done in the town of Olds. Anyone knows where Olds, Alberta is? Very progressive. Are you from Olds? Who's been to Olds? Who's been to the amazing pie shop in Olds and had the coconut cream pie? I did a happiness audit there. We walked in like this, right? So we're happiness auditors from Edmonton. What? We heard about your famous pie. I'm here with Mayor Judy Dahl, right? I was joking. So, but the town of Olds hired myself, my colleagues, to do a well-being assessment for Olds. And what we did is we did a campaign with the mayor. Anyone knows Judy Dahl? She's an amazing mayor. And I said, let's go to the high school, Judy. Why are we going to? I want to talk to teenagers. Okay, we'll go to the high school, talk to the leadership. So we want you to fill out the survey on well-being. What did we find? So 15-year-olds to 85-year-olds filled out the survey. It was a 2-week campaign. We said, I said, look, I'm your well-being doctor. I'll do the full objective diagnostic on Olds and compare to the province. But I'm really curious about what you love about Olds, why you stay here. And I want to know about your sense of belonging, your trust of neighbors, your trust of local business, your sense that you're making enough money to meet your needs, that you have financial stress or not. And they're all couched in positive terms. So we asked did the survey, and the results were fascinating. I expected a little town of Olds to have a strong sense of neighborliness. Nope. Trust of strangers? Are you kidding me? Trust of local business, lower than expected. High levels of financial stress, knowing that 30% of citizens of Olds aren't making a living wage. Right, so I was matching these. So fascinating. You talked about the mirror. This was the mirror. This is us. Oh, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to engage the citizens? How are we going to tell them? I said, look, this is just a litmus test, the beginning of a conversation that says your social capital seems lower than what I even imagined it should be. And I don't know about that Legion Hall there, but you need more gathering places. cafes are important gathering places where people connect. They bump into each other. One of the favorite gathering places used to be right across from City Hall here, called Insomnia. It was put there by my friend Devin Spackman because he noticed that Nenshi and the street person could be at his same coffee counter and have a conversation. He studied ecosystems. He's a military engineer, and he thought this through. So these are the practical things we can do with these measurements. And I just want to test them more and more. I want to see how neighborhoods could use them, how communities could use this kind of information to improve, actually, because you want to improve the social capital in your communities.
So when we talk about measuring our own well-being at the end of the day, you touched on it there, it's very subjective and a lot of time. It's weighing up to our own expectations. So really, what would you comment to someone in Calgary, especially now, with the certain economic conditions on measuring your own well-being at the end of the day in relation to expectations? I find a lot of the time well-being is tied to the expectation. You mentioned the car, the house, the things we have. So do you find in your work that a lot of the times it's the expectations that typically need to shift for people? How would we, at the end of the day, be able to measure our own well-being?
Well, I would never subscribe my approach to living. I've chosen a life of, I guess, sufficiency, and we have no debt. People say, well, how do you live, Mark? I says, well, I've been debt-free for 10 years. And, I left my government job in '99. I'm trying to live my model, but I also know that I'm somewhat of a villain of GDP as a household because we don't make as much as the others. And I know that Albertans spend 98% of what they make, no matter how much they make. You'll spend 98%. If you make $150,000, you'll spend $147,000. And so we have this weird culture now that prices are in the toilet again. I think, what business person is operating at every price point in oil? That's what this economy, people laying people off means to me as an economist. You were not a good steward. You weren't thinking that oil on average should probably be more in the $40 to $50 range. So we have this kind of sense of entitlement, and we didn't collect our fair share of royalties. I'm a critic of the royalty review work. I think we suck, really. We weren't nearly as assertive as Peter Lougheed. We collected 27 cents on the dollar, and the current budget says 3.5 cents on every dollar of oil will be collected. And the royalty review won't change any of that. So here we are now complaining, when prices are 61% of what they were in 2013, a bigger drop than when Getty experienced the oil drop. And so what is that, what are we supposed to learn from that? If I stand up and say, well, you were irresponsible, you're not a good steward, I could be a critic of the government for that, because I sat there, I was in those discussions at Treasury Board, and I saw the decisions we made and the lack of courage that we had under Stelmach, and that obviously Lougheed did something different. If he can collect 27 cents on a dollar and Norway can collect 70 cents, then, maybe I'm digressing a bit, but I think on a personal level, everyone is entitled to their own pursuit of happiness. Yes, expectations are a big issue. I think there is a feeling, obvious, to me there's the problems of consumerism and materialism, a sense of lack, sense of not actually feeling at peace with who you are, that somehow you're defined by all the stuff you have. And we know that's not true. Our children teach us that. And then we put them in education systems that our eldest is in business school now. I said, I know your marketing profs aren't telling you, don't read my book because you'll be messed up. You won't pass the course. Finance and accounting, you won't, really. I got them at the end of their term. And they were messed up. They would tell me, we're messed up, Mark. So this is a big challenge. This is, I think there's a challenge in Alberta because we have such abundance. We have 200 years of oil in the ground. We have renewable energy options galore. We should have more solar capacity than Germany, And what do? We can't even get our public utility to put a solar panel and get so creative about writing off the capital. Right? So all of these things, they're frustrating to me as an Albertan. I want to go over to Rachel's house and go, Rachel, at least go to New York, the PISA bond markets with a balance sheet. So we could say, these are our assets. We got tons of assets. How are we going to design an economy that is flourishing, that's resilient? Instead of waiting for the next shock and oil, the next roller coaster, right? And so I don't know when where that conversation is going to start or happen, but it's not happening. And it's disappointing because we have such an opportunity. And individually, we can consume less. We can spend more time with our children. Like my wife and I actually decided, I realized as a business person, now that my mortgage is dead, truly dead, I don't actually have to work as many billable hours. That means I have more time to spend with young people who aspire to do something great, because I'm not so busy putting in my 8-hour days. So to me, I have a responsibility now. So those are the things that I can only take personal responsibility for. And I can't judge my neighbor. But it makes it complex to live in this province.
Hi, my name is Numana. I'm from Pakistan. I want to, when you were mentioning the personal traits, I thought you would say something about the personal traits like gratitude, gratefulness, and how it improves our well-being. And in fact, you can have everything, but lack of gratitude would not make you feel happy because you are ignoring your blessings. And forgiveness, for example, so letting go of the past. So would you like to say something about the personal traits while we were talking about the first three important components of happiness?
Thank you. I probably skipped over those notes. No, I mean, I think the truth, the science is showing, and we talked about this earlier, positive psychologists are if anyone watched the Suzuki show, The Nature of Things, where he put Matteo Ricard, who I actually met in the meeting in Bhutan, in New York, who is the French physicist who was asked to go into loving kindness in the MRI machine. And it's amazing, the prefrontal cortex lights up. Your heart chakra lights up when you feel, right? You feel that fluttering or that tingling or something. What is that, right? So when we experience generosity, reciprocity, gratitude, love, a hug, something happens physiologically. We can begin to measure it. We can actually begin to think about effect in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. My friend Andrea Moen, I don't know if you know Andrea, she's a Court of Queen's Bench judge. She's sitting on the bench thinking about, she's dealing with childhood trauma, abuse, and she's saying, what happens to the prefrontal cortex when a child is abused? What is arrested? Where the pathway's blocked? Right? How do you reopen the pathways so that the prefrontal cortex is lit up when you go into loving kindness? I think those are fascinating things for science, and they can actually be measured, and they can be affected. So thank you for,
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark. I'm happy to be here tonight and to attend this gathering. I have 2 questions. First of all, I want to introduce myself to the audience. My name is Daniel. I'm a member of the Dialogue Network team that was started by Dr. Arthur Clark. Where the members if we went to the communities, we meet with the people in the library or in the community gathering, we approach any strangers that we want to make a dialogue for the city of Calgary, to make the city of Calgary to be unique and people will know each other's. My question is, what is the strategy to acquire the economic happiness? So I'm a migrant, and I went to school here in Canada. I graduated from University of Calgary with a Bachelor of Social Work. And I'm still struggling to be happy economically. So how can I acquire that process based on the lecture that you gave it to us? Thank you.
Can I ask you specifically why you feel you're struggling economically? What specifically are you struggling with?
Yeah, because I tried to many options. I got a mortgage, as you say, as Arthur Clarke said that he had a mortgage. I got a mortgage, and also my job just I work, I just pay the bill. I don't serve anything. So I'm still. That's why I'm saying I'm still struggling. How can I get a strategy to serve the money? And
Okay, my only response to that is I don't want to start a revolution in Calgary, but I tried it in London. It just didn't quite catalyze yet. But here's the truth. Money is a social invention. We can create as much of it as we want. Private banks have a monopoly on creating money out of thin air. It's the Latin word fiat, to be made out of thin air. When they create a loan on their books, they create money out of thin air. 98% of our money is created by private corporations called banks, not governments. People think, oh, the government makes money. Think about that. If I told ATB to create enough liquidity, I'm not saying a free lunch, I'm saying we could have living wage, we could have guaranteed income, we could have no interest mortgages for low-income households, we could have conditions in which you're actually saving money. In fact, maybe saving isn't actually the issue. The issue is, one of the things we're trying to do in Cincinnati is have a low-income household live debt-free forever. How? It's brilliant because the home is the greatest asset you have. But when you've paid off the mortgage, what can you do with it? I can go to the bank and get the bank will say, we'll give you a second mortgage. We'll give you a line of credit at 7%. Thanks. If I had a corporation, if I had the right to do that as a bank, I would do the same thing. Why can't I do that? I'm a corporation. My wife and I have a corporation. I have an asset. Banking is about leveraging assets, right? But, right, we're close to that. That's the truth. So I can create any economy I want because I have the creativity of money creation, but no money today is not tied to real assets, real wealth. It's phantom. It's speculative. It's a casino. Derivative trading, options, right? The subprime mortgage bubble. Watch The Big Short. Watch that movie. And I know all about that stuff. So I'm saying I could. That's why I want to go see Pope Francis. I want to go see somebody. It's like, come on, Queen Elizabeth. Come on, Prince Charles. Come on, someone. Can we just stop this bad movie? It's a bad movie. It's a B movie. It's a worse than a B movie. And it's totally unnecessary. I can create as much liquidity to fund any kind of economy I want. I don't want to destroy the environment, but I can put a renewable energy capacity in this province in 5 years, 10 years, right? Because I have a lever, I have ATB, I have AIMCO, right? To create the money in as much quantity as we need. That's what Aberhart understood, 1935. That's why they shut him down in Toronto. Are you kidding? We can't have Alberta go rogue and create their own money. No. That's the dangerous game we play here if we're going to play, right? But we're shining a light of truth on the money power. Make no mistake, they're not going to give up that power because it's a beautiful game and nobody knows about it because people are ignorant about it. But Henry Ford said if people knew how easy the banks create money, there would be a revolution tomorrow. That's Henry Ford. There's no revolution. So that's important. I've advised the Bernie Madoff victims. I said, Bernie's he's a foot soldier. Go talk to George Soros. Go talk to the guys that actually control the money world. Anyways, that's my that's my message of hope because I hear your pain. There's no reason you should there's no reason anyone should go to sleep at night with anxiety about money. None.
Mark, thanks so much. David Swan, and really appreciate your revolutionary spirit, talking about the things that actually we care about. But a reminder that we've decided in our society that this is the way we want to live. And in fact, we're not even going to talk about the way we live as a possibility for something that we could change. And as a politician for 12 years, I can tell you that we don't talk about this stuff at all.
And we will not talk about it until enough people tell us we're not talking about the right things. And we're not making decisions about the kind of things that people really care about. Security, community, love, mutual support, a sense of trust. I hear increasingly from many organizations, and certainly it's true in government, even in the healthcare system, that there is a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration, cooperation. It is a very competitive spirit that we've imbued, and a sense of scarcity everywhere. So that much you've highlighted. And what you've started here is a conversation that we all have to carry into our families, our workplaces, our communities, as if we have some influence on what's important. What we talk about is what's important, but we don't talk about these things for a number of reasons. Maybe it's because we don't really believe it's possible to change any of them. But I guess I'd like to hear from you if there is a society that, not Bhutan because it's not comparable enough to us, but where is a society that is actually starting to make this shift, to realize where our real priorities are, where we want to spend our time, effort, and energy, and maybe even some of our money, to shift away from the debt and insufficiency model. Is there a community comparable to North America or the West that is starting to make this shift?
Sadly, I would say no.
We could be the first.
That's my point. You said it, David. It said it begins with imagination. It begins with telling a new story. What's the new storyline? You know, when Peter Lougheed and, you know, they wrote that white paper around his kitchen table, they expressed a vision for this province. They said their little campaign slogan wasn't that we were going to diss our social credit grandparents. They said now, that was it. Now's our turn. Now's our time to define, right? It's about imagination. It's about what narrative, what story do we want to tell our grandchildren? Because we can create any world we want. We have, I just told you, we have the capacity, we have all the tools to develop the ideal economy of well-being. We're the 6th happiest province in the country. We should be first. Saskatchewan's number 1. But everyone's pretty close in terms of life satisfaction. So we're the envy of the world, right? People come here and are like, Canada, like, wow, are you kidding me? Anyone's been anywhere else? I've been to China. I'm like, I get to Vancouver, I'm like on my knees going, thank you for fresh air, right? And then I go to China, believe me, I shake the tree there too. Hu Jintao read my stuff. I'm like, dudes, wake up. Xiaokang is China's economic policy. Xiaokang was written in their national policy in 1991 by Deng Ping. Xiaokang is a Confucian word which means well-being. I was in debates with 2 deans of philosophy in Shanghai. They're like, Mark, you're right. Then I told them about the money system. He says, look what China has. China has Xiaokang. China has well-being, economy at their heart. Would we be cynical and say, no, that's just words? What else does China have? And it's interesting, right? You thought I'd talk about Tibet or somewhere. I'm talking about China. I go to China, it's like, what are you doing? Keep your farmers on the land. They're the stewards of the earth. Pay them a living wage. Don't drive them into Shanghai. I'm your advisor. I have nothing to lose. I'm not going to get arrested first, you know. And I'm a critic of capitalism. Capitalism hasn't grown up. Capitalism's still in a teenage bratty stage. When is it going to mature? Get with the true capital program, what I'm talking about. Why China? Because China adopted, this is amazing to me. Everyone knows what happened in America with Abraham Lincoln. America, the entire War of Independence was fought to decouple from the banks of England and Europe. That was why the Revolutionary War was fought. Thomas Jefferson said, if private banks ever become the dominant power, we will become slaves in our own country. That happened in 1913 after the death of Lincoln with the Federal Reserve. Who adopted Lincoln's ideas? Mao. Sun Tzu before him. What does that mean? China has its own sovereign money system. It doesn't accept the private banks creating the money. Unfortunately, it's going crazy too. It's created too much money. So I look at China and go, China, you could lead the world if you so choose to. You're the longest living civilization on the planet. And what are you doing? You're following the West? You're so enamored with our model? Come on. You have these ancient philosophies of Taoism. And so I'm very bullish about China. Bhutan's in trouble. Bhutan opened its borders. The young students told me in El Paso when I sat with 20 young Bhutanese students, they said, we think the king's going too fast. He's opened the doors to iPads and all the other things that now require us to increase our GDP to decide whether we sell our electricity to China or India. So the prime minister I met in New York in 2012 is gone. Now it's about business. Is there Shangri-La? I'm not sure. I think the Shangri-Las are right here in this country. They're called First Nations. They're actually sovereign nations. There's as little as 200 people to 10,000 people. And they have the ability to be the models I'm talking about. That's why I'm working with them. Are they awake to the opportunity and fully alive to it? Not yet. I'm still kind of a magician probably. But that's where my hope is. The healthy functional chiefs, young Billy Morin from Enoch, Sutina, the Soyuz, Clarence Louis, Robert Louis in West Bank. Why? Because those nations have the power to create their own money. They have the power to exercise sovereignty over their lands and traditions and cultural assets in ways that should be the envy of us. And their scale is so small. They have huge financial trusts, a lot of them. They're sitting on cash, which they could provide affordable and good homes for their people. But the chiefs make $250,000. Why? Because they've lost the matrilineal structure where the women elected the chiefs. So the chief power structure is an artifact of treaties which is imposed from the British system. Put the women back in the matrilineal role. Those are things that I look for and try to hope. Those are my hopes, is in right here in this country. Not go somewhere else. The Danes, what do the Danes have? I discovered something when I was teaching this stuff in China. I taught a course on the economics of happiness in Harbin, the MIT of China. And I said I had so much time on my hands. How come the Danes, the Scandinavians they have high, they have the darkness disease, the Norwegians, and their suicide rates aren't that great. And I said, there's something else I'm missing. Amphetamine use. I looked at amphetamine use statistics, marijuana use, right? Oh, there we go. Australians, Canadians, Danes, higher levels of amphetamine use. What does that mean? Is your happiness not actually genuine? Is it masked, right? So I don't know if there's this promised land, but I certainly know, I believe it can happen. It can happen right here in our neighborhoods, in my neighborhood. And it's not easy because it starts with a conversation with my neighbor. It starts with, it's just talking. And my only impatience is, how come we're not getting on with this awesome opportunity? We could be the showcase of the world. We could be the renewable energy capital of the world like Iceland. We got gazillion barrels of oil. We've got environmental liabilities that we don't put on our books, neither does Suncor, and we kind of expect someone else is going to pay for it down the road. So that's what we don't have to go very far. But there's lots, as you know, there's lots of trauma and dysfunction, right? Chiefs go sideways in this way, and there's all that residential school stuff that keeps coming up, and it's crazy. But the opportunity is real.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Here. I'm Danielle. Thanks for your talk. This topic of the financial system and our debt structures and this endless obsession with growth has always fascinated me. I was a business student, worked in commercial banking for 3 years, and the whole time thinking, why are we talking about things this way? So my question for you is, how do we understand this system and what we've created, and we can start the conversation about how to change it, kind of refocus our priorities. In the meantime, how do we reconcile that with being an individual in this society that has this structure?
Well, as all of us know, awareness is the first step in, and then, you know, the process, there'll be denial, and there'll be those who try to dismiss you, and, right? So it begins with awareness. I always say, look, you've only got 30 minutes, me, and you got to take with some, you know, with some trust what I'm saying. Go do your own homework about the banking system. Ask your president of the bank. Ask your branch manager. Watch what happens. Where does the money come from? How do the bookkeeping entities work? I've never thought about it. They end up like chasing their tails. So it starts with awareness, and then the question is, well, how can I live? You've probably seen The Matrix, right, Danielle? The Matrix is one of my favorite movies, right? Or The Truman Show, right? It's constructed, oh, everyone's happy, and, you know, the birds are singing, and it's like, what? Wait a minute. This is big constructed reality. So what are we going to do? We're going to get a lot of my friends who know about the money. They said, Mark, when you learn about the money system, you have two choices. You get mad and go crazy, right? Because you can go crazy. You say, this is a monstrous injustice that our religious leaders say nothing about, and our prime ministers and our presidents do nothing because they're muzzled. Obama was muzzled within a week of his first week in the White House. Why? Because the same guys that affected the Bush administration were right there. He didn't replace them with the people I know that could change the system, that Ralph Nader knew and Ron Paul knew. These men will get killed, right? So, and that will happen. Other presidents have been killed because they thought, oh, I'm going to do the just thing. JFK was killed for that reason, in my opinion. So, not just my opinion. So, this is a dangerous game, upsetting the money power. And I would say the first guy to get nailed was Christ. He upset the money power. He only got mad once, and he went into the temple and said, what are you doing charging a tax on a pure sacrifice to the God? You know, get out. That's what the financial world does. It extracts a piece of me, right? It creates money out of thin air, and then expects me to work for the interest, which isn't actually available to all of us. We play this insane game of musical chairs. And someone's always, right, in the musical chairs, someone's always out. Someone's always going bankrupt because there's never enough money in the system in totality. And when you start to look at it, you go, wow, I never learned this in business school, did you?
No, nothing. There was no conversation about this. We learned traditional economics.
And how about the snake around the stick? I was like, the snake around the stick, the price versus quantity, famous economics graph. Did my economics profs ever tell me where the snake around the stick came from? Assume price. Assume that this thing we call value, which in Latin actually value means to be worthy or strong, is always related to money when you know that money was created as a fiction out of thin air, tied to nothing of real wealth. Are you, what? How could this relationship between price and quantity be real then? So and then the question is, well, what are the alternatives? So I have to live in this matrix. I have to pay the mortgage. I have to live the reality that I can't save because I just barely cover my costs. How sad. So what can we do? Oh, I can do. What was the protest in New York? The sitting in the. I said, dudes, you're not in the right space. You should be in the boardrooms. Who do you think all those board dudes are? Where do you think they go and meet every year? They go to Davos, drink wine in private. They build a government business, the world's business plan. That's whose space you should be occupying. Try to get into those meetings. So we weren't occupying the right places. And so what else can we do? I'm doing what I can do. You know, the Cincinnati thing I'm telling you about. That's exciting to me. Gives me energy. I know it's possible. It's going to be a love of neighbor in action. And we're going to use churches and the endowments of Christ Church Cathedral, which was endowed by Procter & Gamble, the two families that went there. They're going to provide the liquidity to do the right thing in the sense of now we can keep our money locally. We can help our neighbor. We can help our black communities stay in those neighborhoods. as an act of love and mercy, right? And through our imagination and our genius of what we learn in finance, we can do it. And once we do the first one, it's going to go viral. And I know it's possible.
Thank you, Mark. There's water under your podium if you want to take a break. We've got a lady here with another question.
Oh, sure.
Thank you very much. I am Bukola, and I'm a Nigerian. I want to first let you know that most immigrants come to Canada because of this mortgage thing and car financing. If you've not known that, I am telling you that tonight. Most immigrants come because you can actually live in a house of your own within 1 year in Canada, as long as you can do 2-3 jobs at the expense of your children. And now that you know this, will you still continue doing what you're doing? That's my question for you. Now that you have known that immigrants come because they want to become homeowners and they want to ride, or how do I put it to you? Let me put it this way. In my culture, we are taught as children that you go to school, when you are done, maybe university or you learn a skill, you work for some years, then you buy a piece of land. You could do whatever you want on the piece of land, but you must first work really hard to be able to buy. It's not mortgage. So after that, you may think about marrying. Then after marriage, children come, and every holiday you go to site. We call it site. The land, the piece of land becomes site. Every weekend you go there with your wife, you get 10 blocks. We build with blocks, and you stay with the bricklayers, the masons, and you watch them do it. Then maybe another holiday, you come, put 5 blocks there. Like in 7-10 years, you'll become real, genuine home owner. You're not paying mortgage till death. And people don't even care. It's fancy. That little fancy is what they care about in life. And I've had to talk to a lot of people about this before, but they don't listen. It's just like, you are there, so I want to come. Whatever it is, my cousin is there, and he's bought the 3rd one, the 4th one. And so now that you know this, will you still continue to dissuade people from getting into trouble, financial trouble? Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you for reminding me of my own roots. My grandfather came to Calgary and my mom's dad in 1923 from Austria. He was poor. He worked hard, almost died in the mine and field. My dad came in 54. They both came, they were German, so they experienced in Calgary, right, their own kind of cultural abuse. But they had a work ethic. They worked hard. In those days, it was actually hard getting a mortgage for the home. They had to go to their Jewish neighbor, in my case, my parents, and get a really high interest mortgage. But they imparted on me a joy of coming here and seeing that this was a place of opportunity, and it still is. It is for so many new people, but even within 1 or 2 generations. So I'm first generation. And yes, I'm schooled in economics at the U of A. Maybe that's my trauma. But I know I have enough of an ethic, a work ethic, that knows I don't want to be in debt. And so other cultures also remind us that there are different ways of developing assets. The Amish raise barns together. They take a shared equity position. The genius of the Homestead Act of Abraham Lincoln, which gave, you could say it was the destruction of indigenous culture and people, but it was an ingenious way of saying, you have a plot of land out there in the West that is yours to develop. And the joy of working with your neighbors to put it all together was an experience of And then something happens, like within 1 or 2 generations, we get lazy, we get entitled. We think we want that, our children want all of what I have, well, my wife and I, they want that as soon as they graduate from business school. Well, it's not going to happen. They have to work as, maybe not quite as hard as I did, because maybe they can get an inheritance. But it's a fascinating, I mean, I appreciate your comments. Again, but, my whole sense of injustice, though, is the system that, again, creates such anxiety and trauma in a culture in which we have such prosperity. But I do honor the fact that hard work, working hard and having meaningful work is critical to human joy and well-being. I will never understate that. So I just think that in a system that I now understand as an economist is unjust, then I feel I have a responsibility, because it doesn't just affect me, but my brother and sister in Ghana or South Africa or China. So thank you for that reflection. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Jeffin Nguyen. I'm right here. I would like to ask a question. Rather, it's not a question, it is a comment on what you mentioned about trust. I think everything is based on trust. If I don't trust the person sitting next to me, I wouldn't be sitting next to her. Mm-hmm. And I think our society, the way in which it was set up, I think we're trained, externally trained, to distrust one another. And I wonder how, for us to build this human capitals and live in harmony with one another, how are we going to be able to come out of that, mindset of which you cannot even trust your neighbor? Because if you cannot trust your neighbor, I could go to my neighbor and knock the door or talk to his kids, or they might call a cop on me because they don't know me, because they don't trust me. So how are we going to even start without that question of trust?
That's great. Trust is that most precious of all assets, and it can take years to build up and be gone. And David Swan knows as a politician, right? Be out of office, like suddenly the tide turns and everyone loves Rachel. Something, what? Why did you? I don't get that, right? But anyways, I digress. But I think it's really important that trust is something that we build, and only through encounters of each other, only by, and oftentimes through crisis. The Calgary floods united people, right? People, the Montreal ice storm united people. Maybe it's, I don't know, I would say, do you really need a crisis to build trust? I've been to Israel. I've seen the lack of trust between Palestinians and Israelis. It's outrageous as a Canadian. I'm like, what are you doing? You're from the same tribes. And you build walls, and you don't think that your Palestinian youth could be gainfully employed in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? Like, I don't get it. From as an outsider, but yet it's a long-standing condition of distrust. And trust, trust counts in the sense of where you have high degrees of trust as a business person with your clients, you have, customers for life. If I trust my Starbucks coffee to be the same every day, I was sitting in Starbucks today, I was like, this is really interesting company. I can go to any Starbucks and I can get my caramel macchiato with the same stripes on it, right? I want a smiley face on my sorry, we just do the crosshatch thing. No, I do. I say, put a smiley face on my whatever. You're going to sprinkle something on it. People laugh. I'm like, but I was thinking how remarkable it is that, if Starbucks, if my next coffee wasn't really that good, I might not go back to Starbucks. So trust is a very precious thing, and you're right. We're schooled. I think in our younger, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but in those early days of childhood, right? There's with attachment theory. Some say, well, you don't. My friend in New York, she's a clinical psychologist. You don't seem to have suffered from any attachment problem. I said, I guess not. Maybe, I don't know. It wasn't just because I was breastfed, But where does the trust begin? And how quickly it can be eroded in Rwanda, and right? And how, or in Yugoslavia, where there's 400 years of conflict between neighboring villages, where it doesn't even make sense. Like just because they haven't spoken to each other in 400 years, and one day, a youth goes over and talks to the girl from the other place, right? You've seen stories of in Israel, the Palestinian kids talking with. I've been in Jerusalem. I talked to the, Jewish people. Like, what's wrong with us? We have been indoctrinated with a sense of distrust from our American Jewish brothers and sisters to not trust our Palestinian sisters. How do we change that? By beginning to share the same space together. I might still not like you or like your behavior, but I can create those conditions in which I can begin to know you and get to know you. And so again, I think we just need to create those conditions in which trust can be very high. And actually countries, what's interesting, the happiest countries tend to have low levels of inequality. This is really important. Alberta's inequality is actually pretty high between income groups. Inequality destroys empires, like China has had over centuries. So inequality matters because it's a measure of trust, right? Inequity matters. So these are the kind of tangible things we can pay attention to.
So Sarah Arthurs, I wanted to end Mark van Engelen and Seema Jindal. I wanted to ask are you going to ask the people, did you want to just speak to what you want the participants to contribute? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. NewScoop is really happy to be here tonight, and we're involved in providing some media support to this event over the next 2 or 3 days, and creating some video footage and stories that come out from all the wonderful learning and exploring that people are going to be doing together. So one of the things we would like to do is that as you leave, myself and Carolina and Barb will be out in the foyer, and we would like to connect with you about some questions. We'd like to invite you to think about what has caught your attention from this evening, what did you appreciate, and what kind of actions might be bubbling or surfacing for you as a result of what you have heard this evening. And I know that there's also an opportunity which Mark is going to speak to as well. Or should I just try and...
So you can just write on the Post-its if you're a bit camera shy about what you think we should do in Alberta. Yep.
Yeah. So we really would like to kind of create a little bit of a space for some ongoing conversation and dialogue, and for you to kind of share what thoughts have been kind of stimulated for you this evening. We would really love to hear about it. So thank you.
Hi there. It's a very interesting talk tonight, Mark. My name's Tom Popavdak, and given what has been the foundation of industry here in Alberta for much of its history, and that is the oil and gas world, in your vision of building a new economy of well-being, what role do you see the oil and gas industry playing in that?
Well, I think first of all, if I was, I'm gonna put my treasurer hat, finance minister hat on. I would actually start with an examination of what do we have? What's our inventory of natural assets? Our oil and gas, our natural gas, our coal, and begin the conversation with captains of industry as to, are we getting the highest and best use of those assets? These conversations, I suspect, happened in Norway when the North Sea development occurred. So strategic, step back a bit and then invite a conversation about, how are we, that highest and best use language is in real estate, right? So what's the highest and best return for every barrel of oil? What is the environmental liability associated with that? When I did my first carbon account, I did my first carbon balance sheet for Alberta in 1999. And I learned that Alberta's emissions from oil and gas and from all of the sectors was offset only by about 25% by the natural environment, by the forests. So we're running a huge deficit with nature. Do we take responsibility for that? Is it on anyone's balance sheet? Is it on Suncor? Suncor is contributing about 27% of that emission at the time. And I've actually advised Canadian ethical funds on how they could look at companies in terms of other screens. So as an economist, I'm curious about who's getting the highest and best use of our natural resources. Efficiency of cost of production, cost of labor, capital, right? Lowest carbon footprint, lowest ecological liabilities. And then let's think about how we're going to optimize this kind of use of our natural assets. So I've just told you, I could tell the Premier right now, there's 200 years of oil sands based on conservative economic reserve estimates. There's still a lot of natural gas. There's gobs of renewable energy options. Why is it that we haven't had our public utilities be more aggressive, I guess more creative, in putting on more solar panels? When I go to my cousins in Austria, in the shady mountains, every third house has a complete solar array. My cousins are off the grid. What about Alberta? When Amoco was my client years ago, they said, do you know that our cousins in Chicago were the biggest solar producer in the United States? I'm like, what? I said, why don't we negotiate a conversation with Mr. Klein, who was a premier at the time, and we can do everybody's home in 20 years. We'll have every home in Alberta covered in solar panels, and it'll actually pay for itself. Oh, my client said, we don't trust our neighbors in Chicago. I'm like, are you kidding me? You just stare down at an economic opportunity that could have been the envy of this country. So it's intriguing to me. And I've known Rick George and people like that who are great corporate leaders. But why aren't we? It's fine if you say we're in the oil business and that's all we'll do until we die. Go to the Carriage Museum and you know what happens when you dug in your heels and you said, we're just building carriages. And carriages went away, horses went away. So are we going to be smart and really put our money where our mouth is in terms of diversifying our total energy portfolio, getting the highest and best use of all of the energy options, and then actually have a conversation at a national level? How much oil, I had the privilege, I don't know if there's privilege, I was an advisor on the Gateway Pipeline hearing, on the ecological liability of the pipeline. Never was there any discussion about, do we even want to export our oil to China? Like, how much of our oil do we have a domestic energy security strategy for this country? Never have a conversation about that. That's the strategic conversation I want our finance minister and our CFOs of the big oil companies to have. And take responsibility for those assets and the liabilities on your books. So that's what I would, if I were, had some kind of opportunity, that's what I would encourage. Now, I don't see many corporate oil and gas leaders. I see NMAX, they're doing some good things. EPCOR is terrible, in my opinion, as our public utility in Edmonton. It's unbelievable to me, because I know how to write off these capital costs. I know how to amortize them in a way that are creative, that'll count the carbon, the carbon offset value, and you can make a business case for a lot of this stuff. And what if So what? We have 200 years of the supply. What's the rush? You know, in 1997, you probably know this, we brought in this royalty regime called the generic oil sands royalty regime, where you let the business write off 100% of its capital against revenue. No wonder we didn't collect any royalties. Like, what kind of business person wouldn't love that? And we said, well, we needed that because our oil is really expensive and risky. And what did we get? We got runaway cost inflation. So now a barrel of oil costs $65 to produce, on average, including capital. When I studied it in 1999, Suncor was producing oil at $12 a barrel, including capital. What? That's a massive inflation. And I could point partly to the choice of that royalty policy choice, which a bunch of economists, senior economists in this province, embraced as practical.